I never imagined that silence would become the defining language of my life. Before the accident, I used to talk too much. My friends joked that I could fill an hour with words even when nothing important was happening. My wife, Maggie, once told me she fell in love with my voice first and my character second. She said that hearing me talk made the world feel predictable and safe. If I had known what was coming, I would have recorded every moment, every late-night conversation, every laugh that rolled easily off my tongue, every gentle promise whispered in the dark. I would have preserved them while I still could. Because one day, my voice simply disappeared. A steel beam slipped during a routine inspection, just a split-second miscalculation, just a wrong step. It struck my neck and shoulder with violent force, and when I opened my eyes in the hospital, the words I tried forming came out twisted, strained, unrecognizable. My throat felt like it belonged to someone else, a person I didn't know how to be. The doctors explained the damage in careful, sympathetic tones: severe trauma to the larynx and nerve pathways, limited prognosis, years of therapy with no guarantee. My entire future shrank to a broken sound, half grunt, half whisper, barely human. Life can turn cruel long before people do. But eventually, people catch up. During those first weeks, Maggie hovered around me with tight smiles and rehearsed reassurances. She said she needed time to adjust. She said the shock had overwhelmed her. She said we would face the new reality together. For a while, I believed her, because I needed to believe someone still saw me as a man rather than a medical case. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, she drifted away. She stopped sitting beside me during therapy sessions because my strained attempts embarrassed her. She stopped inviting friends over because she hated explaining what happened. She stopped reaching for my hand because touching me meant acknowledging the damage she didn't want to face. One evening, she arrived home later than usual and told me she was exhausted. She didn't explain from what. She simply collapsed into silence, a silence that stretched and expanded until it felt like a wall between us. My attempts to communicate came out as broken sounds, and she responded with impatience or, worse, pity. Then, one morning, I woke up to a house that felt wrong. A house missing something. Her suitcase was gone. The closet was half empty. And on the kitchen counter sat a single sheet of paper with a single sentence written in her quick, impatient handwriting. I deserve a better life than this. No apology. No explanation. No attempt at a conversation. She abandoned me faster than I had learned to lose my voice. For a long time, I didn't leave the house, not even to stand outside. Depression didn't arrive like a storm, it seeped into me day by day, making everything heavy, slow, and pointless. Speaking had become impossible. Eating barely mattered. Living felt optional. I didn't file for divorce. I didn't chase her. I didn't ask questions. How could I? I couldn't speak, and she wouldn't have listened even if I could. But silence has a strange way of clearing the mind. After the grief settled, something else began forming inside me, a sharp, steady determination to communicate again, even if I couldn't speak in the traditional sense. I started working on an idea that came to me one night while I struggled to ask for water, an app that could turn gestures, expressions, or typed words into smooth, natural speech. Something that could give people like me the voice life had taken from them. At first, it was nothing more than a personal experiment, an act of survival during long hours of isolation. But the more I built, the clearer the vision became. For the first time in years, I felt useful, focused, purposeful. The project kept expanding: machine learning, predictive phrasing, emotional modulation. I worked through pain, through exhaustion, through silent nights that felt endless. And then, 3 years later, the world discovered it. A journalist reached out, curious about the mute developer who created a breakthrough communication tool. The story aired on the evening news. Investors called. Clinics requested partnerships. The app exploded across the world, becoming an essential tool for thousands of people who needed a voice. And that's when Maggie returned. I first saw her message in a filtered inbox, her name sitting above a painfully familiar sentence. Hi. I saw the news. Can we talk? I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I considered answering, but because the arrogance stunned me. She had ignored a broken husband who needed support, but she suddenly remembered me when success entered the picture. 2 days later, she arrived at my office in person, wearing expensive perfume and the expression of someone rehearsing remorse. She looked at me like she expected gratitude. She spoke as though forgiveness was something she could simply claim. She said she still loved me. She said she regretted everything. She said she had been scared. She said she wanted to come home. I opened my app, tapped a single phrase, and let the device speak for me. No. Her smile collapsed. She reached for my arm, pretending the story of her return was romantic, cinematic, inevitable. But I had spent 10 years learning the kind of strength silence can build. And I had no intention of letting the woman who abandoned me reclaim anything. When Maggie reappeared, people who knew us years ago reacted with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Some wondered whether I planned to let her back into my life, others apologized in advance for the pain they assumed her return would cause. A few had heard rumors about how she spent those 10 silent years and gently warned me not to expect sincerity. I didn't investigate her life when she first vanished. I didn't have the emotional energy or physical ability to trace a woman who had chosen to escape her own wedding vows. But once she resurfaced with a trembling voice and a story crafted to make herself look tragically misunderstood, something inside me hardened. I realized I needed to understand who she had become, not because I wanted reconciliation, but because clarity is its own closure. The internet revealed the pieces I never looked for. Maggie had moved 3 times. She lived with a man who seemed to vanish from her photos after a few years. She worked in places she once claimed were beneath her. She reinvented herself with each move, creating new identities but keeping none long enough to grow roots. Every chapter ended abruptly, always with Maggie positioned as the victim of something she never took responsibility for. Her life looked like a series of escape routes, not a journey. And now she wanted to escape into mine. After the second unexpected visit to my office, I instructed security not to allow her inside the building. When she called, the phone redirected to voicemail. When she emailed, the messages went straight into a folder I never opened. I didn't want her punished, I simply refused to let her rewrite history with a version that made her feel virtuous. The moment she realized I wasn't entertaining her return, she shifted strategies. She hired a lawyer. Her attorney sent a dramatic letter asking for dialogue, insisting the marriage deserved another chance, and suggesting my silence showed emotional turmoil rather than rejection. The letter suggested I was confused, and Maggie would lovingly help rebuild the foundation we once had. My attorney read it twice and laughed. We filed for divorce immediately. Preparing for the case meant revisiting memories I thought I'd buried permanently. Hospital notes, therapy logs, financial records, everything had to be submitted. None of it hurt anymore, it simply reminded me how much I had rebuilt without her. Every piece of income, every partnership, every patent, every new beginning happened years after she left. Nothing existed during the marriage. Nothing was shared. Nothing belonged to her. The courtroom felt unusually cold when the hearing began. I sat beside my attorney, prepared to use the app for every response. Maggie entered moments later, wearing a dress chosen to project innocence. Her expression looked soft from afar, but the closer she came, the more desperation showed beneath the surface. She tried to make eye contact, I didn't give it to her. The judge began by asking whether reconciliation had been attempted. My attorney answered truthfully, I had declined all attempts because Maggie's abandonment had been absolute and deliberate. Maggie rose to speak, delivering a passionate narrative about fear, emotional collapse, and overwhelming pressure she supposedly felt after my accident. She painted herself as a young woman who panicked rather than a wife who abandoned a disabled husband. The judge listened politely, then interrupted with an essential question. Did you contact your husband at any point during your 10-year absence? She tried to invent an answer before realizing she could not. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again without forming a sentence that could save her. Finally, she admitted she had not. The judge took notes without showing any reaction, but I saw Maggie's face tighten as she realized the truth had done more damage than any mistake she made before. My attorney presented our evidence clearly, timelines, dates, financial progression, each detail proving that every asset had been obtained after she disappeared. Maggie's lawyer attempted a sentimental argument about healing, bonding, and emotional rediscovery, but the judge shut it down immediately. A decade of silence cannot be spun into devotion. When the ruling finally came, the words felt precise and final. The marriage was dissolved. Abandonment was acknowledged. All assets were declared non-marital. No compensation would be awarded. Maggie's shock hit her all at once. Her expression crumpled as if she had expected a miracle, unaware that miracles require sacrifice, not opportunism. She called after me in the hallway, insisting she deserved a conversation. Her voice echoed through the corridor, growing more frantic as I walked away without acknowledging her. Security held her back when she tried to follow. And in that moment, I realized something with remarkable clarity. She left when I had nothing. She returned when I had everything. And she walked away again with exactly what she deserved. Nothing. The courthouse doors closed behind me, but the weight of the past decade didn't lift immediately. Instead, the air felt thick with the residue of a chapter that had stretched far too long, one I thought might never fully resolve. While Maggie's voice faded somewhere behind security's warning, I kept walking until the cold outdoor air settled across my face, grounding me with its honesty. For the first time in years, I felt something that resembled a clean break. Yet the days that followed were unexpectedly heavy. People imagine freedom arrives with bright clarity, but sometimes it comes in quiet, uncomfortable waves. Every room in my house held echoes of a man I used to be, a man who tried to speak for hours just to produce one broken sound, a man who prayed each morning that his wife might walk through the door with an ounce of compassion. Those ghosts didn't disappear the moment the judge read the ruling. They lingered, as memories often do. But instead of crushing me, they reminded me how far I had traveled. News of the court decision spread faster than I anticipated. A few reporters attempted to contact me, fascinated by the way my past had collided with my success. I ignored every request, refusing to allow my trauma to become someone else's headline. My app users, however, sent heartfelt messages, stories of regaining independence, reconnecting with loved ones, feeling seen for the first time in years. Those messages carried me through the nights when silence felt too thick. Then something unexpected began happening. Clinics invited me to speak, not aloud, but through the app that had become my voice. Conferences requested presentations on accessibility, innovation, and the emotional journey behind creating a tool designed to restore dignity. At first, I hesitated. Public attention still felt dangerous, like a spotlight that could expose vulnerability I had spent years rebuilding. But eventually, I agreed to one event, a modest tech panel in Denver focusing on disability-centered design. Standing on that stage, wearing a microphone that would pick up the automated speech from my phone, felt surreal. The audience listened without flinching, without pity, without judgment, just genuine interest. They asked thoughtful questions. They treated the communication barrier not as a disability but as another mode of interaction. For the first time since the accident, I didn't feel broken. I felt understood. After the panel, a small crowd gathered to thank me. They spoke about siblings who struggled with communication, parents who lost speech after strokes, children born with conditions that made words difficult. They told me my app gave them a way back into the world. Each story hit with unexpected force, gentle but undeniable, like water shaping stone. I left that conference with a sense of purpose far stronger than any financial success could offer. Meanwhile, Maggie's attempts to contact me continued with bizarre persistence. She shifted from anger to remorse, from self-pity to manipulation, trying every emotional angle she could imagine. When none of it worked, she turned to people we once knew, messaging old friends, fabricating narratives about our history, pretending the divorce was a tragic misunderstanding rather than a consequence of her choices. But the people she reached out to had watched the silent years. They had witnessed her absence. They had seen me struggle, rebuild, and evolve without her. Their responses were brief, polite, and entirely devoid of sympathy. With every failed attempt to reclaim relevance, she grew more desperate. One afternoon, my attorney forwarded a message Maggie had asked him to deliver. She claimed she wanted closure, insisted she had changed, and said she deserved a chance to explain what really happened. She framed her abandonment as a mental health crisis, as though removing every trace of herself from my life had somehow been a noble attempt at self-preservation. She wanted a face-to-face meeting. She wanted forgiveness delivered as if I owed her comfort. She wanted to rewrite history one last time. I declined. But her request unsettled something inside me, not because I doubted my decision, but because I realized I no longer needed anything from her. Not answers, not apologies, not remorse. The person she left behind, the broken man gasping for a voice, had died years ago. The man standing in his place no longer bled from old wounds. Freedom doesn't always come from walking away. Sometimes it comes from realizing you no longer care. Over the next few months, my work expanded in ways I hadn't anticipated. I was invited to collaborate with accessibility engineers, educational institutions, and global health organizations. Every collaboration opened doors to communities I had never known, communities filled with resilience that mirrored my own. During one particular visit to a rehabilitation center, a teenager approached me with hesitant steps. She held a device running my app, and when she lifted it, her chosen voice, a soft, clear tone, emerged. "Thank you," the device said. "I didn't want to talk before this. Now I can talk to anyone." Her mother cried behind her. And something inside me shifted so deeply that even the memory of Maggie felt irrelevant. A life built in silence had become a life filled with voices, not my own, but countless others who borrowed mine through the app. Every new story felt like reclaiming something Maggie had taken when she walked out the door. I wasn't just rebuilding my life. I was shaping lives for people who needed what I once needed so desperately. And while my world expanded, hers continued to shrink. People stopped entertaining her dramatic retellings. Her posts online grew scattered and defensive. Eventually, her presence faded into digital background noise, the kind people scroll past without noticing. One evening, while reviewing development progress for the next version of the app, I realized a simple truth. Maggie had become irrelevant to every version of my future. And that revelation felt like the quietest, purest form of victory. Life has a strange way of circling back to moments you thought were finished. Months after the court ruling, when Maggie had faded from my reality like a smear wiped off glass, the opportunity arrived to speak, through my app, at a global conference on human-centered technology. The event drew innovators, doctors, rehabilitation specialists, and hundreds of patients from around the world. It was the kind of invitation people dream of receiving, the kind that validates years of struggle. I accepted without hesitation, not because I sought recognition, but because I wanted to honor the silent battles fought by people who shared my experience. The conference was held in a vast auditorium filled with screens, stage lights, and quiet anticipation. The organizers reserved a seat on stage for me, along with a handheld microphone that would feed directly into my app. When the lights dimmed and the announcer introduced me, something remarkable happened. The room erupted with applause before I even spoke. Not because I was special. Because they understood what silence costs. I began the keynote with a sentence my app articulated in a calm, natural voice. Silence is not the absence of a voice. It is the absence of someone willing to listen. The moment the words echoed across the room, I felt a shift, a collective understanding. I spoke about the years after the accident, about the isolation that deepened when communication became fragile. I described the emotional distance from the people who once cared, the exhaustion of feeling misunderstood, and the way silence magnified abandonment. And then I spoke about rebuilding, slowly, quietly, through stubbornness that refused to fade. I described the first prototype of the app, shaky and primitive, and the moment it produced its first clear sentence. I watched the audience lean in as the story unfolded, not out of pity but out of recognition. When the keynote ended, the applause sounded less like noise and more like acceptance, an entire room saying, "You made it back." After leaving the stage, I walked through a corridor where posters displayed future innovations. My app was featured among them, next to devices designed to restore mobility, sight, and autonomy. For the first time since the accident, I felt part of something bigger, a community shaped by resilience rather than loss. Yet success had an unexpected side effect: visibility. When the conference live stream circulated online, a short clip of my keynote went viral. It wasn't the technical part. It wasn't the explanations or the demonstrations. It was a moment during the Q&A when someone asked how I found strength while rebuilding my life in silence. The app responded with a single line I typed slowly and deliberately. "The people who love you will stay even when you cannot speak." That sentence spread across platforms, turning into a quote pinned to pages, reposted on blogs, shared in support groups. It reached people dealing with disabilities, heartbreak, trauma, and every loss imaginable. It also reached Maggie. She sent one last message, an apology stretched into paragraphs, filled with explanations designed to soften her exit from my life. She said she watched the keynote. She said she admired my strength. She said she hoped I would one day forgive her even if I never wanted to see her again. I read the message once, then archived it without responding. Not out of anger. Not out of revenge. But because forgiveness had already happened in a far quieter way. For years, I carried the weight of abandonment like a stone lodged beneath my ribs. But somewhere between the courtroom ruling and the applause at the conference, that weight dissolved. I no longer held anything against her, not because she deserved peace, but because I did. Forgiveness is not always a gift to the person who hurt you. Sometimes it is the final step of reclaiming your own life. The weeks following the conference unfolded differently than anything before. Opportunities expanded. Investors pitched ideas that aligned with my mission. A team of developers joined the project to create new features: real-time translation, adaptive tone modeling, advanced gesture recognition. Schools began integrating the app into special education programs. Hospitals requested training seminars. Even families of patients reached out with stories of how communication had transformed their relationships. In all of this growth, I realized something important. The accident had taken my voice. The silence had taken my marriage. But neither had taken my future. I built a life not in spite of what happened, but because of what happened. Every long night spent coding, every frustrating attempt to express myself, every moment when loneliness threatened to swallow me, all of it had shaped the man I became. And Maggie? She remained part of the story, but no longer part of the narrative that moved me forward. She had become a lesson, one that taught me the true definition of loyalty, resilience, and the difference between love and convenience. One evening, while reviewing feedback from users, I received a video from a rehabilitation center in Japan. It showed a group of patients practicing with the app, forming sentences with hesitant excitement. They waved at the camera, smiling in ways that reminded me how deeply human the desire to communicate is. The final clip in that video showed an elderly man using the app to speak to his wife for the first time in years. His chosen voice, warm, slightly trembling, said, "I missed you every day." His wife cried and covered her mouth. I closed the laptop and sat in the quiet for a long time. Not the painful quiet of the early years. Not the suffocating quiet of abandonment. But a peaceful quiet, the kind that settles around a person who survived something he once believed he couldn't. For the first time since the accident, the silence felt like a companion rather than an enemy. And in that moment, I understood something simple and profound. A decade ago, Maggie walked away because she thought my future had ended. Today, the world awaited the next version of the voice I created. Sometimes life doesn't give you back what you lost. It gives you something better. Something earned. Something unbreakable. Something entirely your own.